My scholarship was stolen, and my family's keepsakes were set on fire. I knelt at the gate of the military base, clutching a heavy box of medals, and cried out, "Take them back! Just give me my family back! I am the son of a soldier who died defending the border, the child of a doctor who died on the front lines of a pandemic, the grandson of a decorated war hero, the brother of a DEA agent killed by the cartels, and the kin of an award-winning teacher who gave her life to save her students. But now I'm just an orphan, scarred and beaten, with a rich kid's boot on my neck." My academic advisor said, "You have no one to back you up. Of course, you're going to get pushed around." The dean just smirked. A Gold Star family. Who even cares about that anymore? They burned the last things I had of my parents, laughed that my whole family was dead, and called me a walking curse. Until that day, when I knelt, bruised and broken, at the gate of that military base and trembling, opened the soot-stained box of medals. 10 minutes later, the entire base was on high alert. The roar of the cafeteria surrounded me as I cleared another tray, sweat trickling down my forehead. The lunch rush was at its peak, and I'd been at the dishwashing station for 3 hours straight. My arms ached with the repetitive motion. "Hey, busboy, we need a refill over here." I wiped my hands on my apron and walked toward the voice. My steps faltered when I saw who it was. Chadwick Chad Thompson, the richest kid on campus, and its undisputed king bully. "Coming," I muttered, turning to get a basket of fries. When I returned with the fresh, hot fries, Chad was roughhousing with a few guys from the basketball team. I carefully placed the basket on the edge of their table and tried to make a quick exit, but Chad's voice, exaggerated and loud, stopped me. Well, if it isn't our poster boy for financial aid, Leo Martinez." The table erupted in laughter. I didn't answer, just tried to walk away faster. "Leo, I'm talking to you. Are you deaf?" Chad shot up from his seat and grabbed the back of my collar. He looked me up and down, a sneer playing on his lips. "I heard you applied for the Gold Star Family Scholarship this year. Someone like you thinks you deserve that money." My fist clenched, but I kept my voice steady. "The scholarship is for students who need it. I meet the requirements." "Requirements?" Chad barked out a laugh. "My father is on the board of trustees. I am the requirements." He slammed his fist on the table. The basket of fries I just delivered went flying, scattering across the tabletop. "Oops, clumsy me. Busboy, could you clean this up?" Chad said with fake surprise, his eyes glinting with malice. I took a deep breath and went to get a rag. Behind me, one of his friends asked, "Chad, why are you messing with this loser?" "You don't get it," Chad said, raising his voice so everyone could hear. "These guys love to play the victim to get handouts. I can't stand it." I silently wiped the table clean and brought them another basket of fries. I was used to this kind of humiliation. "Hey, busboy, what's that cheap pin on your shirt?" Chad suddenly shouted, drawing the attention of nearby tables. "A Gold Star pin, you." I instinctively covered the small, slightly faded bronze pin on my chest. It was one of the few things the Army had sent back after my father was killed. "It's got to be fake, right?" Chad stood up abruptly and snatched at the pin. "You can get these online for $5. Probably uses it to get sympathy in government checks." The chain snapped. I stumbled forward, and my tray of dirty dishes clattered to the floor. Ignoring the pain in my knees, I scrambled on the floor, searching for the small pin. "Oh, look at the drama," Chad sneered, stomping his foot on my hand, grinding my fingers into the pin beneath them. "Let's get a good look at this piece of junk." I gasped in pain, but refused to loosen my grip, protecting the pin in my palm. A few scattered laughs echoed through the cafeteria. Most students just lowered their heads and ate faster, pretending not to see. "Boring. Let's go shoot some hoops," Chad said, waving his friends off as they left. At 3 o'clock, my shift ended. My manager handed me $80 in cash. "Leo, try to come in a little earlier tomorrow." The lunch rush was brutal. "Will do. Thanks, Mr. Henderson." I carefully tucked the bills into the deepest pocket of my wallet. It was my food money for the next week. Leaving the cafeteria, I headed straight for my academic advisor's office. Before knocking, I straightened my collar, making sure the small Gold Star pin was properly displayed. "Come in." My advisor, Ms. Miller, was scrolling through Amazon on her computer. She didn't even look up. "What is it?" "Ms. Miller, I'm here to turn in my scholarship application materials," I said, placing a manila folder on her desk. She finally glanced up, her eyes flicking to the folder. "Just leave it there. I'll look at it when I have time." "Ma'am, The deadline is today. It needs your signature for verification. I know that, she snapped, her voice sharp with annoyance. What's a rush? You're not the only one applying. I pressed my lips together, about to say more, when the office door swung open. Chad Thompson strolled in, holding a Starbucks cup. Ms. Miller, my mom wanted me to bring you this, Chad said with a grin, placing the drink on her desk. Only then did he pretend to notice me. Oh, look who's here. Our charity case. Ms. Miller's expression softened instantly. Oh, Chad, please thank your mother for me. That skincare cream she sent over is working wonders. No problem. Chad glanced at the folder on her desk and picked it up. What's this? Scholarship application. I instinctively reached for it, but Chad had already pulled the documents out. Certificate of Service for A.U.S. Army Captain, Gold Star Family ID. Chad raised an eyebrow dramatically. Leo, you know forging federal documents is a felony, right? They're not fake, I said, my voice rising. Chad, don't cause trouble, Ms. Miller said, but she made no move to stop him. As Chad flipped through the papers, he accidentally knocked over his Frappuccino. The cold, brown liquid instantly saturated all of my documents. I shot to my feet, my fists clenched. Chad, what? You want to fight? Chad leaned in, his expression a mask of arrogant defiance. Ms. Miller finally stood up. All right, that's enough. Leo, the documents are ruined. I can't review them like this. You'll have to prepare a new set. Ms. Miller, getting these records reissued takes time. The deadline. That's your problem, she said coldly. Either get new ones or withdraw your application. Your choice. Chad shot me a triumphant wink and swaggered out of the office. I carefully gathered the soaked, sticky papers and walked out in silence. Behind me, I heard Ms. Miller mutter, kids these days, always making a mountain out of a molehill. I pulled 3 all-nighters to get the application materials together again. An old friend of my father's at the Department of Veterans Affairs heard what happened and express-mailed certified copies of my dad's service records and commendations. A director at Johns Hopkins, where my mom had worked, dug through the archives to reissue proof of her service as a frontline doctor during the pandemic. Even my brother's old partner from the DEA, all the way out in Arizona, sent notarized copies of his citations for bravery. The new file was thicker than the first, and every single page felt heavy in my hands. I showed up at the administration building 2 hours early and waited outside Ms. Miller's office until she arrived, her heels clicking on the linoleum floor. Ms. Miller, here are my supplementary materials for the scholarship, I said, handing her the folder with both hands. She glanced at her watch. Leo, the deadline was yesterday, but last time it was because. Rules are rules. She unlocked her office door, the keys jangling. If everyone was as disorganized as you, how could the university possibly function? I stood in her doorway, not moving. The edge of the folder was starting to wrinkle in my grip. Chad Thompson destroyed my documents on purpose. Do you have proof? Ms. Miller turned, and the cloying scent of her perfume made me step back. Leo, a university is a place where we deal in evidence. If you're going to accuse another student, you bring proof. My throat felt tight. The sound of footsteps echoed down the hall. Professor Chun from the history department was walking toward us, carrying a stack of papers. He saw us standing there and the look of tension on our faces, and his eyes narrowed behind his glasses. Ms. Miller, it's just a matter of accepting a folder, Professor Chun said, his voice as calm and measured as his lectures. If I recall correctly, the review committee doesn't meet until next week, correct? Ms. Miller's lipstick mouth formed a thin, hard line. Professor, protocol is protocol. And protocol can have a little humanity, Professor Chin countered. His gaze then fell on the pin on my chest, and his expression shifted. Finally, with a few other faculty members now glancing over, Ms. Miller reluctantly took the folder from me. But the way she tossed it carelessly into a desk drawer made my heart sink. Thank you, ma'am, I said mechanically, not daring to remind her that the materials needed to be signed and verified. The day the awards were announced, a crowd was packed around the bulletin board in the main hall. I squeezed my way through, my eyes scanning the list from the top. I scanned it again and again, until I saw Chad Thompson's name. Mine wasn't there. Looking for something? Chad's voice came from right behind me. His newly dyed red hair was like a ball of fire, making my eyes ache. Oh, right. checking for my scholarship announcement. He theatrically pulled out his phone, flashing the direct deposit notification from his bank. $5,000 just came in. I'm taking the guys out for drinks tonight. You want to come? I ignored him, my fist tight, and walked away. The advisor's office was locked. I waited in the stairwell for 4 hours until I saw Ms. Miller walking out with a brand new Louis Vuitton handbag. Why was my scholarship application denied? I asked, my eyes burning as I blocked her path. She instinctively hid the bag behind her back. That was the decision of the review committee based on a holistic evaluation. I met every single condition. Chad's family drives luxury cars and lives in a mansion. On what ground could he possibly? Leo. Ms. Miller's voice was suddenly sharp. Watch your tone. You don't know that the Thompson family hasn't fallen on hard times. I pulled out my phone and showed her the pictures Chad had posted to his Instagram story last week from his vacation in the Maldives. Ms. Miller's face flushed, but then she sneered. So now you're stalking and taking secret pictures of your classmates? With character like that, no wonder you were rejected. I want to file an appeal. Be my guest, she said, turning to unlock her car. But let me remind you, an appeal requires the signature of the department chair. And the department chair just so happens to be Chad Thompson's uncle. I clenched my fists and walked away in silence. For the plaque on the dean's office door read, "Meeting in progress." I sat on a bench in the hallway until the sky turned dark. Finally, the door opened. The dean emerged with a pot-bellied, balding man. Both of their faces were flushed from what was clearly a long, liquor-filled dinner. Dean Collins. I rushed forward. About my scholarship. The dean frowned, looking me over. And you are? The other man chuckled. Ah, Collins, this must be the kid my son was telling me about. The one who parades around using his family's service to get attention. The dean's look of dawning comprehension made my stomach twist into a knot. Oh, right, the Martinez kid. He patted my shoulder, his palm clammy like a reptile's. Young man, you need to learn to stand on your own 2 feet, not ride the coattails of your ancestors. My father died for this country, a Gold Star family. The dean actually smiled, turning to Chad's father. Who even cares about that anymore? He looked back at me, his eyes filled with the kind of pity you'd give a stray dog. If you don't have powerful friends, you're going to get stepped on. Welcome to the real world. As they stepped into the elevator, I heard Chad's father say, you should just expel a troublemaker like that. Outside the glass walls of the building, the setting sun bathed the entire campus in a blood-red light. I took out the small bronze pin. The words, "Let us not forget their sacrifice," were already starting to fade. The autumn wind rustled through the sycamore trees as I dragged my feet back toward the dorms. From a distance, I could hear shouting and loud music, a jarring sound in the quiet evening. The closer I got to my dorm, the stronger a strange, acrid smell became. The unmistakable stench of burning fabric and paper. I rounded the last corner, and my blood ran cold. On the lawn in front of the dorm, Chad and a half-dozen of his friends were dancing around a bonfire, drunk and laughing. In the flames, I saw my copy of the Armed Forces officer, its cover curling into black ash. The inscription my father had written inside, "De oppresso liber," twisted in the heat and vanished. Next to it were my bed sheets. The quilt my mother had sewn for me was burned through, exposing the blackened cotton inside. Hey, look, our war hero is back. Chad was the first to spot me. He raised his beer bottle like a rifle and made a shooting noise. Bang, you're eliminated. The others roared with laughter. One of them used a stick to poke at my half-burned journal, sending pages scattering into the air like gray moths. The firelight reflected on their flushed, drunken faces, making them look like a pack of demons celebrating around an altar. And then I saw the wooden box. It was on its side at the edge of the fire, glowing red-hot. The lid had been pried open, and through the warped opening, I could see the molten shapes of the metals inside. My grandfather's World War II victory medal was slowly deforming in the heat. The red, white, and blue ribbon on my father's Distinguished Service Cross had already burned away. No, a raw, inhuman scream tore from my throat as I lunged for the fire. The wave of heat was so intense it forced my eyes shut, and I could smell my own eyelashes singeing. I ripped off my jacket, wrapped it around my hands, and grabbed the handle of the box. The searing metal burned right through the fabric, and the sickening sizzle of my own flesh filled the air, but I refused to let go. I clutched the box to my chest and rolled away from the fire, putting out the small flames that had caught on my clothes. The box was so hot it blistered the skin on my chest, but I curled around it like a mother protecting her young, shielding it with my body as the kicks and punches started to land. Disgusting. Chad spat. He snatched a bottle of lighter fluid from a friend and poured the rest of it over my head. Let's get you cleaned up. The cold fluid ran down my hair and into my eyes. Through a blurry haze, I saw him flick open a lighter. Chad, the dorm's resident advisor, finally alerted by the commotion, came running out. What are you doing? The flame on the lighter, just inches from my face, went out. Chad shrugged. Just playing around. It's not like I actually lit it. He leaned in close, his beer-soaked breath washing over me. Remember this, Martinez. This is what happens when you cross me. The smell of gasoline was suffocating. I knelt behind the dorm building, clutching the warped, blackened wooden box. In the moonlight, every deformed metal was a silent accusation. My grandfather's Medal of Honor, earned in the brutal trenches of the Korean War, was a melted lump of scorched metal. The deep scratch across its face, where he'd used it to deflect shrapnel from a grenade, was now fused with a streak of dried lighter fluid. The ribbon on my father's Distinguished Service Cross was incinerated, the star emblem cracked in half, an award he received for taking out a dozen insurgents in a single firefight. All that was left of my mother's citation for valor during the pandemic was a corner of the Golden Boss seal. On the back, she had written, "When Mommy gets back, I'll make you my famous lasagna." My brother's DEA badge was curled and blackened, still stained with the dirt from the shallow grave the cartel had buried him in. The photograph of my sister receiving the Carnegie Medal for heroism was now just half a smiling face. During the hurricane, she had pushed 6 of her students onto a rooftop before being swept away by the floodwaters. These weren't just pieces of metal. They were my family's lives. But why? Tears streamed down my face. At 3 in the morning, ignoring the searing pain, I used the last $80 I had to my name to call an Uber. An hour later, I was standing in front of the main gate of Fort Harrison Military Base, holding the box. The soldier in the guardhouse saw me and immediately raised his rifle. "Halt! This is a restricted military area. Do not approach." I fell to my knees on the cold asphalt. The contents of the box spilled out with a tragic clatter. 21 medals gleamed under the harsh floodlights, like a constellation of fallen stars. "Take them back." My voice was a raw, broken whisper. "Please, just give me my family back." The soldier's flashlight beam swept over the medals, then froze on a distinctive, star-shaped medal with a light blue ribbon. His face went pale. When he spoke into his radio, his voice was trembling. "Dispatch, this is Gate 1. I have a civilian kid at the gate on his knees with a Medal of Honor belonging to Sergeant Major Martinez. Repeat, a Medal of Honor." A few moments later, I heard the sound of disciplined, running footsteps approaching. A major knelt, his eyes scanning the scattered medals. When his fingers brushed against the Medal of Honor, I saw them tremble. "Son, what's your name?" he asked, his voice suddenly gentle, as if he were afraid of startling me. "Leo Martinez," I rasped. My father was Captain David Martinez. The major's head snapped up. He barked at the lieutenant behind him. "Get the general on the line now. It's Captain Martinez's son." He took off his own uniform jacket and draped it over my shaking shoulders. "Was your grandfather Sergeant Major Alejandro Martinez?" The moment I nodded, I heard the lieutenant speaking frantically into his radio. "We have a code 1. It's General Thorne's commanding officer's grandson. He's injured." Less than 5 minutes after they brought me into a reception room, the door flew open with such force it slammed against the wall. A gray-haired general with a chest full of ribbons and medals strode in, the stars on his shoulders shining so brightly they made me squint. "Leo." The general's trembling hand touched my gasoline-soaked hair. "It really is you." I stared at the face, which was both strange and yet somehow familiar. He unbuttoned his collar and pulled a worn, creased photograph from his inside pocket. In the photo, a much younger version of my grandfather had his arm around a teenage soldier. On the back, it said, "Victory Day in Korea, me and my radio man, Private Thorne, on the 38th parallel." "I'm Marcus Thorne," the general said, his voice thick with emotion. He dropped to one knee, taking my hand. Your grandfather. He used his hand to pull me out of a bombed-out bunker. His fingers brushed the raw burn on my palm, and his words died in his throat. As the other officers in the room gasped, the general's voice suddenly became a roar. Medic, get a fucking ambulance from the base hospital now. He gently pushed my sticky hair back, revealing the bruise on my forehead. Who did this to you? I opened my mouth to speak, but the world went black, and I collapsed. The last thing I heard was the general bellowing, Investigate! I want a name, and I want it yesterday. When I woke up, I was surrounded by a world of sterile white. I was in the VIP wing of the base hospital. Every cut and bruise had been treated, and even the grime under my fingernails had been cleaned away. On the bedside table sat a new, polished wooden box. The metals had been carefully cleaned and laid out on a bed of dark red velvet. You're awake. A female doctor in a crisp army uniform was adjusting my foredrip. The generals have been in the conference room for 3 hours. I think they're about to start a war. Just as she spoke, a sharp command to attention echoed from the hallway. The door opened, and General Thorne entered, followed by a group of 7 or 8 high-ranking officers whose shoulders glittered with stars and eagles. The youngest of them, a full colonel, had red, puffy eyes, as if he'd just been crying. Leo, this is your father's old CO, General Thorne said, gesturing to a major general with a jagged scar across his cheek. During the last border skirmish, your father, he provided covering fire for his unit. The major general snapped to attention, his salute crisp and sharp. Leo Martinez, your father's last words to me over the radio were, Take care, my boy. His salute began to tremble. We failed you. We all failed you. Surrounded by the shining brass of the Army's top leadership, I curled up in the clean white sheets like a lost dog that had finally found its way home, and I began to sob. Years of repressed grief, anger, and pain broke through in a tidal wave of tears. General Thorne sat on the edge of the bed, gently patting my back as if I were a small child. It's okay, son. You tell Grandpa everything. Tell me who did this to you. I managed to stop crying and began to tell them everything that had happened. When I got to the part about Chad burning the medals, a colonel with glasses shattered the water glass he was holding. His face went pale. When he spoke into his radio, his voice was trembling. Dispatch, this is Gate 1. I have a civilian kid at the gate on his knees with a Medal of Honor belonging to Sergeant Major Martinez. Repeat, a Medal of Honor. A few moments later, I heard the sound of disciplined, running footsteps approaching. A major knelt, his eyes scanning the scattered medals. When his fingers brushed against the Medal of Honor, I saw them tremble. Son, what's your name? He asked, his voice suddenly gentle, as if he were afraid of startling me. Leo Martinez, I rasped. My father was Captain David Martinez. The major's head snapped up. He barked at the lieutenant behind him. Get the general on the line now. It's Captain Martinez's son. He took off his own uniform jacket and draped it over my shaking shoulders. Was your grandfather Sergeant Major Alejandro Martinez? The moment I nodded, I heard the lieutenant speaking frantically into his radio. We have a code 1. It's General Thorne's commanding officer's grandson. He's injured. Less than 5 minutes after they brought me into a reception room, the door flew open with such force it slammed against the wall. A gray-haired general with a chest full of ribbons and medals strode in, the stars on his shoulders shining so brightly they made me squint. Leo, the general's trembling hand touched my gasoline-soaked hair. It really is you. I stared at the face, which was both strange and yet somehow familiar. He unbuttoned his collar and pulled a worn, creased photograph from his inside pocket. In the photo, a much younger version of my grandfather had his arm around a teenage soldier. On the back, it said, Victory Day in Korea, me and my radio man, Private Thorne, on the 38th parallel. I'm Marcus Thorne, the general said, his voice thick with emotion. He dropped to one knee, taking my hand. Your grandfather. He used his hand to pull me out of a bombed-out bunker. His fingers brushed the raw burn on my palm, and his words died in his throat. As the other officers in the room gasped, the general's voice suddenly became a roar. Medic, get a fucking ambulance from the base hospital now. He gently pushed my sticky hair back, revealing the bruise on my forehead. Who did this to you? I opened my mouth to speak, but the world went black, and I collapsed. The last thing I heard was the general bellowing, "Investigate! I want a name, and I want it yesterday." When I woke up, I was surrounded by a world of sterile white. I was in the VIP wing of the base hospital. Every cut and bruise had been treated, and even the grime under my fingernails had been cleaned away. On the bedside table sat a new, polished wooden box. The metals had been carefully cleaned and laid out on a bed of dark red velvet. "You're awake." A female doctor in a crisp army uniform was adjusting my foredrip. "The generals have been in the conference room for 3 hours. I think they're about to start a war." Just as she spoke, a sharp command to attention echoed from the hallway. The door opened, and General Thorne entered, followed by a group of 7 or 8 high-ranking officers whose shoulders glittered with stars and eagles. The youngest of them, a full colonel, had red, puffy eyes, as if he'd just been crying. "Leo, this is your father's old CO," General Thorne said, gesturing to a major general with a jagged scar across his cheek. "During the last border skirmish, your father, he provided covering fire for his unit." The major general snapped to attention, his salute crisp and sharp. "Leo Martinez, your father's last words to me over the radio were, 'Take care, my boy.'" His salute began to tremble. "We failed you. We all failed you." Surrounded by the shining brass of the Army's top leadership, I curled up in the clean white sheets like a lost dog that had finally found its way home, and I began to sob. Years of repressed grief, anger, and pain broke through in a tidal wave of tears. General Thorne sat on the edge of the bed, gently patting my back as if I were a small child. "It's okay, son. You tell Grandpa everything. Tell me who did this to you." I managed to stop crying and began to tell them everything that had happened. When I got to the part about Chad burning the medals, a colonel with glasses shattered the water glass he was holding. When I repeated the dean's words, "Who even cares about that anymore?" the scar major general actually reached for his sidearm and had to be restrained by the man next to him. "Marcus, we can't handle this through normal channels," a man in a civilian suit with a Department of Defense pin on his lapel said gravely. I just pulled the initial files. The Thompson family is well connected. The father's position on the Board of Trustees was arranged by the Deputy Secretary of Education for the state. General Thorne let out a cold, humorless laugh. He reached into his coat and slapped a red leather ID holder on the table. Under the gold seal of the United States, the words Department of Defense, Office of the Inspector General burned in the light. "Relay my orders." The general's voice was suddenly laced with ice-cold fury. 1. Contact the State Attorney General. I want a full-scale corruption investigation into the Thompson family and every politician protecting them. 2. Notify the Department of Education. The entire leadership of that university is to be suspended, pending a federal review. And 3. He gently touched my bandaged hand. "Give me a platoon of MPs. I'm paying a visit to Leo's school." "Sir," the DOD official protested. "That's highly irregular." "Irregular?" General Thorne ripped open my hospital gown, exposing the dark purple bruises on my ribs. When his grandfather held that hill for 3 days with a single company against an entire division, nobody was talking about what was regular. "Get me a secure line to the Pentagon." The next day, as the morning sun streamed through the blinds of my hospital room, General Thorne was using his calloused fingers to button the top button of my fresh hospital gown. Behind him stood 8 soldiers in full tactical gear, the emblems on their black uniforms gleaming. "Leo," he said softly, "today, Grandpa is going to collect a debt." Parked outside the hospital were 3 black, military-plated SUVs, and standing in front of them was a figure that made me flinch, Professor Chun, dressed in a crisp Army uniform, the stars of a brigadier general shining on his shoulders. By his feet was an old leather briefcase with the faded gold lettering, S, Army Intelligence and Security Command. Professor Chun," I stammered. "Call me Uncle David," he said, smiling as he ruffled my hair. "I was your dad's drill sergeant in basic training." He popped the latches on the briefcase. It was filled with 24 manila folders. For years, I've been keeping track. Every scumbag who ever wronged a Gold Star family in this state. Their name is in this box. As our convoy pulled out of the base, I noticed we were flanked by 2 armored personnel carriers. General Thorne sat in the front passenger seat, speaking into a secure satellite phone. Notify the FBI's Public Corruption Unit, the State Police, and the U.S. Marshals. Rendezvous at the target location in 30 minutes. In the rearview mirror, I saw that the once empty road behind us was now filled with a dozen military transport trucks, each carrying a full squad of armed soldiers. The convoy rolled slowly onto the campus, the sunlight glinting off the gold tassels on General Thorne's shoulders. I sat in the back, the phantom pain of the burns on my palms flaring up. Near the main entrance, Chad was lounging with his cronies, spinning the latest iPhone in his hand. When he saw me get out of the lead military vehicle, he raised an eyebrow, a mocking grin spreading across his face. "Well, look what the cat dragged in. Our charity case, Leo Martinez," he drawled, his voice loud enough for every student nearby to hear. "What's the matter? Couldn't get your scholarship, so you hired a bunch of actors?" He looked General Thorne up and down, taking in the simple, undecorated service uniform. He let out a short, sharp laugh. "Where'd you dig this old geezer up? The local community theater. He really looks the part." His friends howled with laughter. One of them pulled out his phone and started recording. "Chad, who is this guy? He looks like he walked off the set of a World War II movie." Chad puffed out his chest. "Leo, you must be desperate. Hiring some old man to impersonate an officer. Do you have any idea what the penalty is for that?" "Aye." Crack. The sound of the slap was like a gunshot. Chad flew sideways, landing in a heap on the pavement. He clutched his face, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth, and looked up in disbelief at General Thorne, who was slowly lowering his hand, his eyes as cold as ice. You hit me," Chad stammered, scrambling to his feet. "My dad's on the board of trustees. You're dead. I'm calling him right now. And he's going to ruin you." He fumbled for his phone, his hands shaking as he dialed. "Dad, someone's attacking me at school. You need to get here now." General Thorne stood with his hands clasped behind his back, not even dignifying Chad with a glance. He simply said to me, "Leo, remember this. No matter how loud a dog barks, it's still just a dog." Less than 10 minutes later, a black Mercedes screeched to a halt at the curb. Chad's father, the portly trustee, stormed out, followed by several campus security guards. "Who hit my son?" he roared. But the words caught in his throat as his eyes landed on the single star on General Thorne's shoulder. His face went ghost white. At the same time, Dean Collins and several department heads came running, their angry expressions freezing on their faces the moment they saw the military vehicles and the general. "General." "Sir." The dean stammered, beads of sweat popping on his forehead. What brings you to our campus?" Chad, still oblivious, ran to his father's side, pointing a shaking finger at the general. "Dad, it was him. That's the old bastard who hit me. Get them to arrest him." "Shut your mouth." His father spun around and backhanded Chad across the face. The blow was so hard it sent Chad stumbling to the ground. Chad was utterly stunned. He held his cheek, staring at his father in disbelief. "Dad, you." His father ignored him. He shuffled forward, his body bent in a deep, trembling bow. "General, sir. My son. He's an idiot. He didn't know who he was talking to. I'll have him apologize immediately." General Thorne gave him a look that could cut glass. "Apologize?" He slowly raised his hand and pointed at me. "The person you owe an apology to is him." The entire campus fell silent. Chad slumped to the ground, the arrogance completely disappearing from his face, replaced by sheer, undisguised terror. He finally understood. He had messed with the wrong person. General Thorne's gaze swept over Chad's father and Dean Collins, cold and unforgiving. He raised a hand and gave a sharp, subtle signal. 3 black sedans with government plates pulled silently onto the campus lawn. 8 men and women in dark suits, carrying official-looking briefcases, stepped out and strode toward them. The man in the lead, who wore thin-rimmed glasses, spoke in a clipped, emotionless tone. "Mr. Thompson, Dean Collins, we are from the State Attorney General's office. Please come with us to answer some questions." Chad's father turned the color of ash, sweat pouring down his temples. "This is a misunderstanding, General. A misunderstanding?" The lead agent gave a thin smile and pulled a thick document from his briefcase. Last year, you embezzled $7 million from the university's construction fund through fraudulent bids. The year before that, you bribed the Deputy Secretary of Education to secure your position on the Board of Trustees. And 3 months ago, you illegally diverted federal scholarship funds to buy your son a new Porsche. The campus was utterly silent, the only sound the rustling of paper. Dean Collins, the agent, produced another file. Your son was involved in a fatal hit-and-run. You used a scholarship slot and a guaranteed graduate school admission to pressure the victim's family into dropping the charges. He paused. Oh, and we've also found 6 offshore bank accounts in your name, with a total balance of over $23 million. The dean's legs began to tremble violently. I was forced to. It was all Thompson's idea. Suddenly, Chad's father dropped to his knees with a sickening thud. General, I'll donate my entire fortune to a veteran's charity, please. The dean felt his knees beside him, tears and snot streaming down his face. I was wrong. I know I was wrong, Leo. Please, say something for me. I just looked at them, my face a stony mask. General Thorne stood with his hands behind his back, his eyes like chips of ice. Take them away. The agents moved in, hauling the 2 men to their feet like sacks of garbage. A dark stain spread across the back of Mr. Thompson's tailored trousers. The dean's glasses fell to the ground and were shattered under a heavy boot. Chad sat frozen on the grass, watching his father being loaded into a car. He finally broke, sobbing hysterically. Dad, you can't take my dad. No one paid him any attention. The wail of sirens cut through the campus quiet as the cars sped away. Only then did General Thorne turn to the stunned crowd of students and faculty. His voice boomed across the quad. Listen to me, all of you. Our heroes did not die on foreign battlefields so that you could bully their children at home. Silence. Then, a girl in the crowd bravely called out, Leo, we're sorry. Soon, other voices joined in. We're so sorry. We were wrong. I stood beside the general, watching the people who had once mocked me bow their heads in shame, watching Chad crumpled on the ground like a discarded toy. The sunlight hit the gold star pin on my chest, and for the first time, it felt warm. Just as Mr. Thompson and the dean were being driven away, a commotion started at the back of the crowd. My academic advisor, Ms. Miller, was trying to slip away, her high heels sinking into the grass. 2 military police officers stepped forward and blocked her path. Ms. Miller, in a hurry. General Thorne's voice was quiet, but it made her freeze in place. When she turned around, her expensive foundation was streaked with sweat, and her perfectly styled hair was plastered to her forehead. She was still clutching her Louis Vuitton bag, her knuckles white. Gee, General, sir. Her voice was a high-pitched squeak. I was following university protocol. Protocol? Uncle David stepped forward and tossed a folder at her feet. The contents scattered, revealing printouts of text messages between her and Chad's mother. The last one read, Get Leo expelled, and the new Birkin bag is yours tomorrow. A collective gasp went through the student body. Ms. Miller's lips trembled. She suddenly collapsed to her knees, hitting the ground hard. She crawled forward and grabbed the cuff of my jeans. Leo, I was forced to. The Thompsons threatened to have me fired. I looked down at her perfectly manicured nails and remembered her kneeling just like this to clean up the frappuccino Chad had spilled. Ms. Miller, I said, slowly pulling my leg away. Do you remember what you told me the day I applied for the scholarship? You said, if you don't have powerful friends, you're going to get stepped on. General Thorne gave a sharp order. Open her bag. 2 female MPs seized the designer bag and dumped its contents on the ground. Bundles of cash tumbled out, along with a thick stack of receipts. Chanel jacket, $3, $6.80. Duty-free shop, luxury skincare set, $2, $5.60. The most damning item was a small notepad with a list of names. At the top, it read, Scholarship slots, 20. Cash value, $60,000. No, it's not what it looks like, Ms. Miller screamed, scrambling to grab the evidence, her nails scraping bloody tracks on the pavement. The lead investigator from the AG's office spoke coldly. Karen Miller, our initial audit shows you've accepted over $187,000 in bribes over the last 3 years. You're under arrest for felony bribery and fraud. He glanced at the general. Her husband, a clerk at the city's Department of Education, appears to be an accomplice. Before he could finish, Ms. Miller's eyes rolled back in her head, and she fainted. A dark, wet patch spread across her expensive skirt, mixing with the dust on the ground. "Get her out of here," the general said with disgust. As the MPs dragged her away, one of her high heels fell off, lying abandoned in the middle of the quad. A student in the silent crowd suddenly shouted, "She deserved it." Instantly, the campus erupted in a roar of applause. The same students who had ignored my plight were now clapping, their faces red with emotion. The student body president started a chant, "And no more corruption. Justice for Leo." I stood next to General Thorne, watching the people who had tormented me get their due, watching as justice, swift and overwhelming, was finally served. The sun shone on the medals in my box, and the scorched, broken metal seemed to shine brighter than ever before. Just as the military police were about to cuff Chad, an old, black Lincoln Town car with military plates sped onto the quad, braking sharply at the edge of the crowd. The door opened, and an old man with a full head of white hair got out, leaning heavily on a cane. He wore a faded, old-fashioned army uniform, the kind from decades past, with a few tarnished medals pinned to his chest. Chad began to struggle wildly, screaming, "Grandpa, Grandpa, help me." The old man didn't even look at his grandson. He walked straight to General Thorne. Then, to the astonishment of everyone present, the 80-year-old veteran slowly took off his service cap and with a heavy thud, knelt on the hard concrete. "General Thorne." The old man's voice choked with emotion. "My name is Frank Thompson. I have failed as a father and a grandfather. I have brought shame upon this uniform." General Thorne's eyes widened in recognition. He rushed forward and grabbed the old man's arm. "Thompson, you're Sergeant Frank Thompson from the 3rd Infantry." The old man nodded, tears rolling down his weathered cheeks. "In '53, at the Battle of Pork Chop Hill, it was Sergeant Major Martinez. It was Alejandro who shielded me from a grenade with his own body." He pulled a faded photograph from his pocket. It showed a young Alejandro Martinez with his arm slung around the shoulder of an even younger Frank Thompson. The quad was silent. Chad had collapsed onto the ground, all the color drained from his face. He had never imagined that the broke loser he despised was the grandson of the man his own grandfather called a savior. "Frank," General Thorne said with a heavy sigh, "your grandson didn't just burn some medals. He burned the last pieces of Alejandro we had left in this world." Frank Thompson spun around and swung his cane, bringing it down hard across Chad's back. "You animal, do you have any idea what you burned? That was the medal your grandfather's savior earned with his life." The old man struck him again, so hard he stumbled himself. "Our whole platoon. Only 3 of us made it out. 3 of us." The cane snapped in two. Chad just lay on the ground, sobbing, all his former arrogance gone. General Thorne helped his old comrade to his feet, then looked at me. "Leo, what should we do with him?" Every eye turned to me. I looked at Sergeant Thompson's trembling white hair, at the broken cane on the ground, and I thought of the melted, twisted medals in my box. "Send him to Arlington," I said quietly. "Let him spend his life tending to the graves of soldiers." Tears streamed down Frank Thompson's face. He started to kneel again, but the general pulled him up. The 2 old soldiers, their hair as white as snow, looked at each other for a long moment, then simultaneously straightened their backs and gave each other a slow, perfect salute. "Leo," General Thorne turned to me, his eyes shining with an intense light. "Would you be willing to wear this uniform?" I looked down at my own scarred hands, then at the scorched medals on my chest. In my mind's eye, I saw my grandfather charging through the snow in Korea, my father patrolling a dusty border, my mother racing through an ICU, my brother deep undercover, and my sister standing in front of her classroom. I would. The moment the words left my mouth, the entire quad exploded in thunderous applause. Uncle David, his eyes red, placed his own cherished service cap on my head. General Thorne personally pinned a brand new, shining Medal of Honor to my chest. From this day forward, the general's voice thundered across the campus. "Leo Martinez is my grandson, if anyone ever dares to harm the child of a hero again." His fierce gaze swept over the crowd. "They'll have to answer to the entire United States Army." That night, I stood on the roof of the general's residence on the base, looking out at the endless lights of the city. My new uniform was a little stiff, but the metal on my chest was heavy, as if it carried the weight of my entire family. I heard footsteps behind me. General Thorne walked over, holding 2 mugs of hot coffee. "What's on your mind?" "My grandfather," I said, taking a mug. "If he knew I'd become a soldier, too." "Oh, he knows," the general said, smiling as he pointed to the night sky. "See that brightest star up there? That's your grandpa, smiling down at you right now." I looked up, and the starlight caught the polished brass on my new uniform, shining like a gentle caress from the family I had lost and the one I had just found.